There are deserts on Earth, so large and lifeless that pilots avoid flying over them at night. Places where dunes move like ocean waves. Places where heat bends the horizon until a man cannot trust his own eyes anymore. And according to one forgotten confession, recorded in 1907, something beneath the sands of the empty quarter had been following travelers for centuries. Before we go deeper tonight, I want to ask you something. Where are you listening from right now? A dark room? A highway rest stop? A lonely night shift? Somewhere quiet enough to hear the house settling around you? Tell me in the comments, because I always read them after midnight. Not internet stories, not made-up folklore, expedition journals, military notes, statements from men who spent the rest of their lives wishing they had stayed silent. Tonight's story comes from one of those accounts, and according to the surviving pages, the man who told this story refused to step onto open sand for the final 11 years of his life. His name was Yusuf al-Harith, though most British survey teams working the Arabian Peninsula knew him by another name. The tracker of Rub al-Khali, the man who could navigate the empty quarter without a compass. Yusuf was born sometime around 1861 near a small caravan settlement on the southern edge of Arabia. No one recorded the exact date. His father disappeared during a desert crossing before Yusuf turned 5. His mother later claimed that dunes had taken him below. People assumed grief had damaged her mind. Years later, Yusuf stopped dismissing those words so easily. By age 12, the boy could locate underground water using nothing except wind patterns and bird movement. By 25, Ottoman traders, pearl merchants, and British mapping crews regularly hired him to guide caravans through stretches of desert other travelers considered suicidal. Men trusted Yusuf because he never panicked, never guessed, never moved carelessly, he once told a British officer. The desert kills men who believe silence means safety. That sentence appears repeatedly throughout his confession, because according to Yusuf, the silence out there was never truly empty. The first incident happened during the summer of 1874. Yusuf was 13 years old, traveling beside an older Bedouin tracker named Hamid. The two were escorting a spice caravan through a remote section of Rub al-Khali after violent sandstorms forced them off route. Late one evening, they discovered another caravan, abandoned between the dunes. 20 camels, 6 wagons, food untouched, water still sealed, but no people, no bodies, no footprints leading away. Nothing. The desert had simply erased them. Yusuf remembered Hamad becoming deeply disturbed the moment he saw the camp. The old tracker circled the abandoned wagons silently before kneeling beside the sand. Then he pressed both hands flat against the ground. He stayed that way almost a full minute. When he finally stood up, his face had lost all color. Years later, Yusuf described it like this. He looked like a man listening to something beneath the world. Hamid ordered the caravan to leave immediately. No fires, no songs, no stopping after sunset. As darkness spread across the dunes, Yusuf noticed something strange behind them. Their camel tracks were disappearing. Not from wind. Not naturally. The prints vanished section by section, like invisible fingers were smoothing the sand, moments after they passed. Yusuf pointed this out quietly. Hamad refused to look backward. Instead, he whispered, "When the desert hides your trail, it means something does not want you escaping." That night they camped on rocky ground, far from the dunes. Near midnight, Yusuf woke suddenly. No sound had awakened him. No movement, just instinct. The fire nearby still burned weakly against the cold desert air, but beyond the light, something stood on top of a distant dune. At first, Yusuf thought it was another traveler. Then moonlight shifted, and the shape became wrong. Too tall, too narrow. Its arms appeared unusually long. And although the figure stood nearly 200 yards away, Yusuf could not focus on its face. Every time he tried, his vision blurred strangely, like his eyes refused to understand what they were seeing. He woke Hamad immediately. The old tracker looked once toward the dune, only once. Then he grabbed Yusuf hard by the wrist. "Never measure it with your eyes," Hamad whispered. Years later, Yusuf admitted those words terrified him more than the figure itself. Because Hamid sounded like a man recognizing something familiar. The figure never approached camp, never moved. It simply remained standing atop the dune, watching them until dawn. and just before sunrise, it disappeared, not walking away, not fading into darkness, gone between one blink and the next. At daylight, Hamid climbed the dune carefully, while Yusuf followed. No footprints waited there, no drag marks, no signs of any person. Only a deep vertical depression in the sand nearly 8 feet long, as though something impossibly heavy had been standing upright for hours. Hamid immediately carved a strange symbol into nearby stone using his knife. 3 vertical lines crossed by one horizontal cut. Yusuf asked what the symbol meant. Hamid answered quietly, "It warns the next traveler. This place has been noticed." Over the following years, Yusuf kept seeing the same mark throughout the empty quarter, on ruined wells, inside abandoned shelters, carved beneath old prayer stones, once even burned into the wooden frame of a collapsed caravan tower miles from civilization. Every single time Hamid discovered the symbol, he changed direction immediately, never explaining further. By 1892, Yusuf had become famous among trade routes crossing southern Arabia. British explorers hired him regularly. Ottoman officers trusted him completely. Pilgrims requested him personally for dangerous crossings. But around that same time, disappearances increased across the empty quarter. Entire caravans vanished. Camels wandered back alone. Search parties frequently found camps, still prepared for dinner, with fires continuing to burn beside untouched food. And survivors always described the same detail afterward. A low humming beneath the sand shortly before something went wrong. Not loud, not mechanical, almost human. Like distant voices speaking beneath miles of earth. Most men blamed exhaustion, heat sickness, desert madness. Why USUF did not? Because he heard it himself during the expedition that destroyed the rest of his life. In October 1896, Yusuf accepted a guiding contract for a British survey team searching ancient ruins rumored to exist deep within Rub al-Khali. The expedition included 4 armed escorts, 2 scholars, and a young translator named Karim. For 3 days the journey remained uneventful. Then midway through the 4th night, the camels became restless, not frightened, listening, their heads tilted toward the dunes surrounding camp. Then the humming began beneath the sand, very faint, very deep. Karim heard it first. The young translator slowly turned toward Yusuf and whispered, "Does the ground sound alive to you?" Before Yusuf could answer, one of the British guards screamed. The sand beneath his feet collapsed instantly, not downward, inward, like a giant eye opening beneath the earth. The man vanished before anyone reached him. Then the dunes around camp started moving. Not from wind, from underneath. The first reaction inside the British camp was confusion, not fear. Sand collapses were not unheard of in the empty quarter. The ground there was unstable in places, especially after shifting winds. But what happened that night did not behave like a collapse. It behaved like structure failure from below. Yusuf shouted for everyone to pull back from the tents. The remaining guards dragged the camels in a tight circle, weapons raised, eyes scanning the dunes. But the sand kept moving. Not violently, not randomly, systematically, like something beneath the surface was testing the ground above it. Then the humming grew louder. Still not loud enough to locate, but now unmistakable. It came from everywhere at once. Karim dropped to his knees, pressing his ear against the ground despite Yusuf yelling at him to stop. His face changed immediately. "I can hear words," he whispered. The British officer stepped forward angrily, ordering everyone to stay calm. But even he stopped mid-sentence, because the sand directly in front of him began to sink in a perfect circular pattern. No wind, no visible trigger, just downward motion, as if the desert was inhaling. One camel broke free from the line and ran. It made it only 20 steps before the ground beneath it collapsed again. The animal vanished without sound. No struggle reached the surface, only silence followed. That was when the first guard fired his rifle into the dunes. The shot echoed strangely, not outward, but downward, like the desert absorbed part of the sound. Yusuf grabbed Karim and pulled him back. "We leave now," he ordered. The officer refused. "We don't abandon expedition equipment in unknown terrain." That decision cost them everything. Within minutes, The perimeter of the camp began sinking in multiple places, not forming holes, forming shapes. Long depressions stretching outward like veins spreading beneath sand. Hammond's warning returned to Yusuf's mind. When the desert hides your trail, it means something does not want you escaping. Except now, there were no trails left, only disappearing ground. The group broke formation. Camels scattered. One scholar ran toward higher dunes, screaming that he could see roads under the sand. No one followed him. They couldn't, because the dunes behind him shifted and erased his footprints as he ran. Then he vanished over the ridge. Silence returned for a moment after that. Not peaceful silence. Pressurized silence. Like the entire desert was waiting to see what humans would do next. Yusuf noticed something then. The humming had changed pattern. It was no longer random. It was responding to movement, to panic, to direction, like it was learning behavior. Karim whispered something Yusuf never forgot. It sounds like it's copying us. At dawn, only 6 people remained alive in the camp. Out of 10, the British officer finally agreed to retreat. But when they attempted to turn back, they realized something impossible. Every direction looked identical. The dunes had reshaped overnight. No landmarks remained. No horizon reference made sense. Even the sun felt wrong, slightly shifted in position, as if the sky itself had been recalibrated. And then they found the symbol. 3 vertical lines crossed by a horizontal cut, carved into a stone that hadn't been there the day before. Hamid's mark, except this time, it was not carved. It was pressed from below, as if something had pushed upward through the rock just to create it. Yusuf realized then that Hamad was not warning travelers out of superstition. He was mapping encounters, recording locations, marking where the phenomenon had been active. That night, they stopped trying to navigate and simply waited, because moving meant disappearing. Around midnight, Karim began shaking violently, not from cold, from listening. "I can hear the guards," he whispered. "They're talking." The officer grabbed him. "There are no guards left." Karim pointed toward the sand. "They're under us." Then the humming rose sharply for the first time, not louder, closer, beneath their bodies. The ground itself felt warmer, like something deep below was exhaling heat upward. One of the remaining men suddenly sank to his ankles, not into a hole, into soft sand that behaved like liquid. He screamed once. Then silence swallowed him. Yusuf understood what was happening. The desert wasn't killing them randomly. It was selecting pressure points, testing where collapse would begin. Like a mind-learning structure. By sunrise, only Yusuf, Karim, and the British officer remained, and that was when Yusuf saw something new. Far across the dunes, a vertical shape stood again. Same proportions as before. Too tall, too still. But now there were more. Not approaching. Not moving. Just appearing at intervals along the horizon, like positions being marked. The officer raised his binoculars, then immediately dropped them. His hands were shaking. "What is that?" Karim asked. The officer didn't answer. He just whispered, "They're mapping us." And for the first time in Yusuf's life, he stopped believing the desert was empty. By the 5th day, water was gone. Heat was no longer the main problem. Sound was, because now the humming never stopped, even during daylight. It existed in the background like a second layer of reality. The British officer began writing constantly in his journal, refusing to speak aloud. Karim stopped eating entirely, and Yusuf stopped sleeping, because every time he closed his eyes, he could feel vibration beneath the sand, not imagined. Physical, like something enormous turning slowly under the desert floor. On the 6th day, they found something half buried. A wooden frame, old, carved. Not modern construction, not Ottoman, much older. Inside, it was a collapsed structure that looked like a watchtower or caravan station, but no record of it existed in any map Yusuf had ever seen. Inside the structure were broken water jars, charred remains of old fire pits, and writing carved into the stone walls. Not Arabic, not Latin, but repeating symbols similar to sound patterns. Karim began crying when he saw it. "This is not abandoned," he said. "This is unfinished." That night, the humming changed again. It gained rhythm, almost structured, like breathing combined with speech. Yusuf pressed his hand into the sand and felt it move slightly beneath him. The officer finally broke. "We are leaving this place," he said. But when they tried to move, their camels refused, not panicked, just stationary, all facing the same direction, toward the deeper desert. Then one camel slowly sank to its knees, not falling, lowering, as if responding to gravity that didn't exist above ground. Yusuf realized something horrifying. The movement beneath them wasn't random collapse, it was directional pressure. Something underneath was shifting mass slowly toward a center point deeper in the empty quarter, and everything above it was being adjusted accordingly. That night, Karim disappeared. No scream, no collapse. He simply stopped talking mid-sentence and walked into the dunes. Yusuf tried to follow, but his footprints were erased within seconds. The officer refused to move after that. He just sat beside the fire repeating, "This is geological," over and over, as if repetition could make it real. On the 8th day, Yusuf found Hamid's mark again, but this time it was not carved on stone. It was inside a bone fragment, half exposed in the sand. Human, old, and cracked as if compressed from extreme pressure beneath the ground. And beneath it, a new symbol appeared. Not warning, direction. Yusuf woke to silence, not the usual desert silence. True absence of sound, even the humming had stopped. The officer was gone. The camp was gone. Only Yusuf remained standing in open sand. But there were no footprints indicating escape, no signs of struggle, just emptiness, as if the desert had reset itself overnight. He walked for hours. Direction didn't matter anymore until he saw it. A depression in the sand stretching for miles, not a crater, not a valley, a linear collapse, perfectly straight, like something enormous had passed beneath the entire desert and left a structural scar behind. At its center stood something partially exposed, metal, old, not natural. Yusuf approached carefully. It was part of a structure buried deep underground, a framework of iron and stone fused together by pressure and time, and carved into it were the same symbols, but now they formed patterns, sequences, like a language trying to stabilize. Then Yusuf heard it clearly for the first time, not humming. Voices, multiple, layered beneath the sand, speaking in rhythm. Not words he could understand, but structured sound, like communication through vibration rather than speech. And suddenly Yusuf understood the truth he had avoided for years. It was not haunting the desert. It was the desert responding to it. The empty quarter was not empty. It was occupied beneath human perception, and everything above was just a thin surface layer. The sand shifted again, slowly, beneath his feet, and for the first time, Yusuf did not run, because he realized something worse than death. There was nowhere above ground that was not already being observed. The final pages of Yusuf's confession were written years later, found sealed inside a trader's satchel near a ruined caravan route. Dated 1907, handwriting unstable. Repeated corrections, as if the writer struggled to maintain clarity. The text begins, "I am no longer certain I left the desert." Yusuf describes returning to civilization after the expedition, but nothing behaved normally. Sounds felt delayed. Grounds felt unstable. He could still hear faint humming beneath floors at night. Doctors diagnosed heat trauma, exhaustion, delirium, but Yusuf refused to travel through desert regions again. For 11 years, he avoided open sand entirely. Then he writes something disturbing. It is not following caravans. It is expanding toward memory. He describes hearing patterns beneath cities, under stone foundations, under wells, under older roads built through ancient trade routes. The same vibration, the same structure. Then the final entry becomes fragmented. Short sentences, repeated fear responses. I hear it under me when I sit still. I hear it in water wells. I hear it in silence. The last legible page contains only one full paragraph. They never said it was alive, only that it reacts. And if it reacts long enough, it becomes pattern. And if it becomes pattern, it becomes place. The confession ends with a final note, written shakily. If anyone reads this, do not travel into the empty quarter after sunset. The sand does not move because of wind. It moves because it is listening. No further pages were ever found, and according to modern geological surveys, there are still unexplained subsurface vibration zones deep beneath Rub al Khali that cannot be mapped properly. Some sensors fail completely. Others record repeating rhythmic patterns at irregular intervals, always 3 beats, always returning. And sometimes when desert winds are completely still, Bedouin travelers still report hearing something faint beneath their feet. Not wind, not machines. Something that sounds like it is trying to speak through the sand.